Hello, everybody. Welcome to our monthly now meetup session. We've been doing a lot of those, and we actually haven't been slowing down a little bit. We had up to like 3 a month in the height of the COVID stress, and now we're going to go back to a bit of a more monthly thing. So thank you so much for joining us. This is Service Design Dallas. A lot of you guys are joining us from many places in the world. So this actually is taking place in Dallas, but we're having speakers from all over the world, and you guys are joining us from all over the world, which is pretty awesome. As always, thank you so much to our sponsors, Slalom, as well as Precocity, who are enabling us to do this and to provide you this knowledge sharing content that has been very valuable to a lot of people who have reached out to us. So this is why we're doing this. You know, we want to be able to share our knowledge to you guys and make the service design practice better and stronger, and hopefully it's helpful to everybody. So this is Service Design Dallas. So I'm Greg Lacloufie, I work at Slalom, and there is Brandon, say hi Brandon, who works in Precocity, and Robin, which also goes by Christopher, which is very confusing, at Capital One, and Brenda is working for GM Financial. So we are Service Design Dallas, but we are basically reaching pretty much every corner of the earth. Talking of which, we get a lot of feedback from you guys, and we really appreciate it because this is why we're doing this. So I just get this yesterday. So Nina is in Australia, so it's 4 a.m. for her, and she's saying that she really cannot make it. But she says some really nice things about what we do, which makes it really worth it for us. We really enjoy doing this. It's not something that is necessarily easy, but we enjoy doing this as a team. And we really appreciate when you guys reach out and telling us that we're doing a good job and we're helping and we're making this world a better place in a way. So thank you, Nina, and I guess you'll be seeing this on YouTube tomorrow. Talking of which, of course, all those events are recorded, so you can probably see we have about a dozen now. You can go to the YouTube channel, Service Design Network, the last chapter, and you will be able to see this session, most likely this evening or maybe tomorrow, depending on bandwidth and upload. But you can see all the past sessions we've done with great masters of service design, as we call them, like Mark Stigdorf, Andy Pollin, Adam Lawrence, Jim Kalbach, Mark Fontaine, and so on and so forth. Very quick introduction. So before this was recorded, Brandon mentioned that if you actually want to ask a question to Aric, which we really, really recommend, please make it obvious to him. So go into the chat room and basically make a question, like question to Aric, and I want to know what you feel about this or that. Do not wait the last 5 minutes. So every time he says something important that is triggering something to you, just go ahead and jump into the chat room and ask the question. We are not going to interrupt him, but our team of moderators is going to capture that question and eventually just ask him at the end. So don't wait the last 10 minutes. If you ask a question now, do it. But we're not going to ask him right now, but just go ahead and ask in the chat room. You can ask questions to each other if you want to, but if you actually have a question for Aric particularly, make it obvious to our folks so we can actually just address that later on. So today we're going to be talking about service design adoption activation. So we have a lot of topics that we've been going through the past couple of years. Some of them very high level about philosophical thinking to service design, and we try to kind of like find a threshold between something that's very tactical and practical and pragmatic about how to make your skills better on the craftsmanship side of things, and sometimes a bit more like on a big scale and working with the government or through a crisis or through COVID, right? So today is something a bit more practical. It's about adoption activation. So a lot of us designers struggle to kind of like pass through, especially in the US, which is like by definition an emerging market in terms of service design, which is still very much coming into maturity. We seem to have some difficulty getting the message through, right? We do all our research, we do all the double diamond stuff, and then we seem to have a difficulty convincing people to move through with the solution we offer. So today we're going to talk about this. How can we do a better job at getting people to adopt service design, activate service design, eventually implement the solution? So it doesn't just stay on the wall somewhere in some office and just dies off there, right? So this is a quote. I presented a very thorough review of our research findings inside the stakeholders 3 weeks ago and still no answer. They just don't get it. says every designer on the planet, right? No, I've heard this 1,000 times. You said 1,000 times. I see Robin shaking his head. I've heard Robin say this 1,000 times last week. It is what it is. If you haven't, you will. But sometimes it's very frustrating as a designer to actually just come out with those incredible insight and spend 6 weeks on doing discovery, and you just show it to somebody, and they kind of like, so what? So we're gonna try to go through this. This is a typical meeting. I'm sure everybody on this call has been in this setting. So this is a typical, design review or recommendation review or session review. This is a boardroom, and this is the stakeholders. This is working waiting for you for the past 6 weeks to do your work and come back with solutions, right? This is pretty typical. Those are your stakeholders. You have to convince those people that what you've done is going to bring solutions to their problems. But this guy, for example, this is, let's call him, Christian. He's the VP of logistics of General Supplies, and he's actually the main stakeholder. He's been asked to cut his budget by 3%, and he's looking at doing maybe like laying off 3,000 people in a call center in the Philippines, right? So he has a pretty big problem, and he's been told those guys are going to come in, they're going to look into this, and they're going to come back with solutions to fix your problem, right? He has never heard of customer journey mapping. He's never heard of service design blueprint. He's never heard of mobile ethnography or some other cool words we use internally as designers. He only cares about one thing: how can I save 3% of my budget? How can I just avoid to laying off 3,000 people? This guy, for example, doesn't even know why he's in this meeting. He got an email last night from his boss who's stuck in an airport in Hong Kong because he lost his luggage, and he's been told, hey, go in this meeting for me, you be the voice of marketing, and tell me what they say, and then we'll make a decision after that, right? We've all been in this meeting. It is not an easy crowd. Those people just don't really understand what we do, and we do usually a pretty poor job at convincing those people that they need to be doing something that could be pretty detrimental to the business. So this is how the meeting usually goes. If it's in the same room, it's the war room, so you actually get up and you basically just explain what you've been doing the past 6 weeks, and you have your insights, you cluster them. If it's virtual, nowadays it's even more complicated because you have to go through mirror and basically tell them what you've been doing, right? This is not something that they've ever seen before. If you're lucky, they've been involved in the process, but most likely they have not, and they kind of like listen to what you're saying, and they're not really quite sure where this is going, right? This is not something to do for a living, so it's a bit hard for them. And then you should learn something like this. So this is not a knock and just find us on the internet. So if you've done this, by any means, this is not criticism, but this is a very typical persona/journey mapping of something going on. Again, the people in the room have never seen this before. They don't really know what it is, nobody does. They're trying to catch up with you here, what you're actually presenting. You also have something like this. I found this on the internet, and this is like a journey mapping dashboard that, to be honest with you, cannot be easy to follow for us. So for somebody actually who's never done this before, it's going to be pretty complicated to understand what you're trying to achieve here. Just to give you an example, this is a SpaceX Dragon 2 interface. So those guys actually went to space and docked at the International Space Station, and their interface, the dashboard, is actually much simpler than this. So we're really not helping ourselves here. And then you go into service blueprint, and you bring up front stage, backstage, touch points, boundary objects, and interdependencies, and processes, and technologies. And your audience is probably struggling at this time to just stay awake or to stay away from the email or the phones or something, right? There's another one that actually just discussed SWOT and opportunities and some stuff like that. And then you may even go to the ecosystem mapping. This actual real ecosystem mapping. I actually left the link there. I got this from our friend Cornelius in Ottawa, who teaches an ecosystem mapping class. This is not easy at all. And the problem is that you're trying to communicate something to your stakeholders, and so far they probably have had a difficult time following what you're saying, and this is not helping at all. This is the look you get when you're done. Those people have no idea what you just said, and they truthfully probably don't really care, to be honest with you. They still don't know if they should be firing people or hiring people, and how much is it going to cost and how long it's going to take, right? You just showed a whole bunch of stuff that they've never seen before. We wonder why design seldom reaches the implementation stage. And then we just get together and we just complain. Like, I don't understand. We did our work. It was great. We did fantastic maps. It's been great. But, and I guess, I hate to put Robbie on the spot there, but we work together, and I can tell there are some maps who are still in the office that have been there for 2 years and nothing has been done with them, right? So it's just not very simple for them to implement. And that's because research doesn't stop with pretty artifacts. Very often we just stop there, we do our review, and then we walk away and nothing happens. So we need to find a way for us as a practice to turn those insights into actionable solutions and then implement them. Otherwise, this is already just pretty maps on the walls that get nowhere. So, and there's Aric. Aric has a very unique way to show this to his stakeholders. So he's going to talk to us for a while about how he's able to improve the adoption and the activation of service design internally. And we're going to find out from him how he's able to do a better job than most of us. So this is Aric. Aric Wood is the CEO of XPLANE out of Portland, Oregon. So if you don't mind, just tell us a couple of things about you, introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what you do, and then we'll let you take over and tell us how you are able to do a better job at activating service design.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you very much, Greg, and thank you, Service Design Network, for hosting today. I'm delighted to be here. By way of introduction, I am the CEO of XPLANE. XPLANE is a design consultancy based in Portland, Oregon. I'll share a little bit more about what we do. As one quick preface, I just want to let folks know, in case we have any technical challenges, one of the wonderful things about living in the American West this time of year is that we have these amazing events that are happening. And right now there's a series of fires and windstorms that are occurring, and we're having some rolling electrical outings. So if by whatever chance my signal goes away, I will share my presentation back with Greg and team, as well as a recording of it, and we will still be able to provide the content to you. But I don't anticipate that'll happen. I just want to let folks know we have a backup plan. Let me jump over to my presentation, if I may. And just a confirmation from Greg. Are we seeing the slides? Cool. Okay. So I'll dive in with that preface. So I am Aric Wood. I've been at XPLANE now for about 15 years, leading the firm for the last dozen or so. And our work is interesting. As a design consultancy, our work really is focused on activating change. We work principally inside of organizations, helping those organizations adopt new visions, new strategies, new processes, new service design implementations. And a core part of our practice is how do we actually not only design that change, but help the organizations we work with bring it to life. So while service design and sort of process work is one of the core offerings that we do, today I'm going to speak much more from our activation practice and share with you some of the insights that we've learned around change adoption. How do we actually bring this to life in organizations? We've worked with a range of organizations, from small businesses and nonprofits to governments and Fortune 500 companies. And this is really rooted in some of the best practices that we've learned that are common to all of those. So hopefully we'll share with you some practical tools that you can apply in the work that you're doing every day. I want to preface the conversation a little bit by just one introductory slide on kind of our high-level theory of change. And this is important as designers. I think we're all going to get this. We've looked at a lot of why adoption fails. And one of the things that's actually fairly fundamental is, in fact, how we've even designed change management, quote unquote. If you think about where a lot of the business schools developed from, if you think about a lot of organizational design, a lot of our organizations and our mindsets around organizations are based on this concept of a tops-down, very hierarchical organization. It's largely rooted in the fact that, between the industrial era and all of the people that were going into business schools after World War II, we really had a hierarchical, almost military structure. And a lot of change management today is sort of designed around that same sort of set of ideas. In the old school, you hear words like change management, you hear stakeholder buy-in, you hear driving adoption, you cascade information. You're very sort of methodical about fixing a process. And our contention, and the one I want to build the rest of this conversation around, is that that is the old way. That is not how organizations work today. Organizations look more like organisms. They are made up of people. They're made up of people with independent minds that are increasingly empowered to make decisions. And that's more appropriate for the world we live in today because the basis of competition today is around creativity and it's around innovation. So our organizations are morphing to shift into that environment, but we haven't necessarily sort of caught up in terms of our change management approach. So I'm going to plant that seed because I think that'll help us understand a little bit more about what I'm going to talk about for the rest of this hour. I want to answer the question very directly. Why is it so hard for me to activate my initiative? I love that slide that Greg was sharing, looking at that boardroom of faces, and I've been to that meeting 1,000 times. That is the reality, is that we do great work as service designers. We're putting together really transformative change, and we're really launching a blueprint for what could happen. But ultimately, we then need to get people to do something different on Monday morning than the way they used to do it. And that's the crux of the problem. How do we get people to change and adopt new ways of work? So we've done some research, and this comes particularly out of our strategy practice, but I think it's a good metaphor for service design projects as well, which is that it's been documented. We spend a ton of money on consultants. Businesses spend lots and lots of money on strategy consulting. They spend lots of money on service design work. And that when you multiply that by the amount of investment that is made by the people in those organizations also to bring it to life, it's a huge investment. And yet 80% of most strategies fail. Strategies, whether they be large corporate strategies or whether they be a service design process, a process change, some other initiative. And I think the reason for that, can be fairly apparent. If you're sitting where either the leader sits or even where you're sitting, seeing the potential future, that future state is really clear. Our visions are very clear about what's possible in the transformation we want to see in the world. The challenge is that when you start to push this into the organization that is already used to a certain way of work, already has behaviors and mindsets established, they see a picture that looks more like this. Maybe that new summit isn't clear to them. Maybe it's unclear what is even possible. What is it you're describing? How could this be possible? What does that future state look like? They may see that future is clear, but to get there's a lot of risk in it for me. Like sort of crossing this landscape in front of us. There's there'll be dragons out there. This is asking me to do work in a different way that I'm not accustomed to. This might be a risk to my job. This might be a risk to the way I work or to our culture. So collectively, we need to understand as service designers that anytime that we're coming in and suggesting a change of the way an organization works, there are going to be people in the organization that are resistant to it for probably some good reasons. Either they don't understand it, they think that there's risk involved, or something else. We've kind of identified that there's a couple key areas that you should keep in mind as you anticipate that meeting and walking into that room. One of them is that oftentimes any initiatives that fail are failing because we haven't established clear line of sight in that meeting between what we're advocating for and how it fits into the bigger picture. If it's not clear that what we're delivering to you as a transformation idea is actually lined up directly with achieving your purpose or your vision or your strategy, we've missed an opportunity to connect the dots for people. And that's the same both in that boardroom as it is in working with the people on the ground that are implementing the change. We need to establish that line of sight very clearly. The second thing that we've identified is a lack of employee engagement. In cases where we have not actually either co-created or engaged the stakeholders in the process, most likely the solution is not as good, but also we haven't got the benefit of their momentum and their buy-in because they have their fingerprints on the solution. So we talk a lot about employee engagement, which I know is something among this crowd you guys get very well. And then lastly, and the one that should be obvious, but it's actually the most common issue, is that organizations rarely invest as much thinking in activating a new approach to work as they do in actually designing that blueprint in the first place. So whether it's looking at a new strategy for a company or a new journey that we're trying to design for a particular stakeholder in the process, we need to actually invest a certain amount of momentum and effort into actually bringing that to life beyond just going into that meeting and pitching the answer. So I'm going to talk very quickly about sort of 3 antidotes to that, and then we'll dive into some techniques for how to do this in our work daily. The first one around the no line of sight issue is strategy alignment. You want to, as a service designer, even if you're proposing, a very discrete solution to how we're going to improve this customer journey, always be walking into that meeting, thinking about this bigger picture for that organization. How does this solution align to the mission or the vision? How is this anchoring to a key strategic initiative that we know is present in the company today? How do we make this story relevant to those folks so they see very clearly the line of sight of how this connects to their bigger missions, maybe what they're solving for as executives? The example of Christian thinking about his call center in the Philippines. How do we link it to the stuff that that individual is feeling inside from an empathy perspective so that we connect to them at a level where they're going to become advocates for us? And if we're working with frontline staff that are affected by the change, likewise, how do we, for them, translate this into where in their overall roadmap this fits and how their role ties to this change and what's in it for them? So key concept one, how do we actually align that line of sight to the bigger picture? The second concept is around empathy and co-creation. And this one is really the antidote to the lack of employee engagement problem. I know this group knows and understands the value of empathy. But again, if you go back to that meeting, you can think about if we didn't apply our empathy tools to that meeting, just like we did when we were journey mapping, we'd miss the opportunity to start to answer the key questions that we know that those people have. And the other thing that we like to highlight at XPLANE is this idea of how do you get to the tipping point in any transformation? We know that most organizations, when you bring something new to them, are likely to have a picture that looks like this, probably a normal distribution of people that are already for it, already against it, or somewhere in the middle. In fact, by and large, what we see across organizations that right out of the gates, there's usually 20% of people in the organization that see this transformation and go, yes, that's awesome, let's do that. I've been waiting for that for a long time. Likewise, on the other end of the spectrum, there's probably 20% of the organization that are openly reluctant to say, no, I don't want to do this. Why should I change? There's too much risk for me, or something else that's resistant. The key is, those aren't the key. The key is that group in the middle, that 60% of people that are sitting on the fence who might overtly be saying, sure, I'm in, but silently, they're in fact in the no way category because maybe they don't understand the value of the change. Maybe they don't understand what the benefit is for them. Maybe they've seen it before and they think, okay, this is going to pass. I'm just going to sit back and wait till this goes. That's where the real opportunity is for us to start to work on making change and using empathy tools to understand how do we bring those people in to the process, both in terms of the communications, but even in the design phases, so that as we're doing our work as service designers, as we're leading our workshops with folks, we've got key stakeholders that have done and been on the journey with us who can begin to be advocates and ambassadors for the work that we're doing and start to build change from within. And then lastly, the last concept I'm going to share today, before we get into sort of how you bring this together, is the concept of the activation curve. And we talk about this as the antidote to that failure to invest in activation problem. When we talk about activation, we're really talking about change adoption. How do you get people from the way they do things today to how they're going to do things tomorrow? And we've created the activation curve to talk a little bit about what that process or what that journey looks like for most people. A lot of change initiatives, you think about, again, that meeting Greg started off with, really stop at awareness. Let me show you the plan of what we're doing. This might be a 50-page PowerPoint presentation that's delivered at a town hall, and we expect, using the old model again, that organizations are just going to snap to it. We know that's not how it works. What we know does work is something that looks more like this. Organizations and people within them need to become aware of what the change is. Then we need to use empathy to help them understand what that change means to them. We want to get them through a phase of actually accepting that change and understanding, maybe not accepting it completely in terms of being bought in, but accepting enough to be willing to try. That's the key. And that first phase we call the hear it phase, or the communication phase. And largely this is around you as a designer thinking about what communications need to go to the organization to answer those key questions. In the second phase, which we call the believe it phase, this is really a learning phase. And one of the things that we identified is that a lot of the reason that people don't adopt new change isn't because maybe they're not bought into the idea, but maybe there's risk in it for them. Maybe they don't have the skills to do it. Maybe they're not aware of how to go about the change. Maybe they don't really know what it means in terms of their day-to-day work, or maybe they're just not sold on it's better. So in this phase, we think about how do we help them acquire new skills? How do we help them apply those new skills and ways of work in their daily work so that they can internalize that change? Some tools that we have at our disposal, for instance, are prototypes. If we can prototype a solution and then we can take a group of stakeholders through that exercise so that they can rehearse that change and see that it's better, again, we can start that momentum of building ambassadors that are bought into it and that have somewhat co-created that solution at our side. Also, in the scaling of the rollout of that change, we as service designers should probably be working with our clients to think about, hey, how do we train the whole call center in this new way of work? What are the learning tools we can provide? What are the job aids that we can provide to help accelerate the adoption for those folks? So we need to think of our design mission as being greater than the immediate change we're thinking about, but also what are the ways we're going to bring this to life? And then lastly, in the live it phase, this is where we start looking at things like how do you integrate this into their new ways of work? How do you get people to really accept that this is now the new business as usual? And this might extend even into things in the organization like incentive plans, onboarding programs, et cetera, that really signal to people this is real and this is here to stay, so that we're really embedding it as the new way of work. And this is an area where I don't think we're overstepping our bounds as service designers to be advising our clients about, hey, how are you going to bring this to life for new employees? Hey, how are we going to make sure that the incentive plan is aligned so that that salesperson actually adopts this new behavior rather than rejecting it? Those kinds of questions are key in this section. So lastly, before I dive into just a little bit of how-to material, I just want to emphasize one thing about our change model, bringing this together, that I'd like to just implant in everyone's mind is that we are all trained very well in how do we get from the current state to the future state? How do we actually take the problem or the current journey that we're on and put people into a new journey and design what that looks like? What we are less accustomed to doing is thinking about how much pressure do we need to put on that lever to make that happen? What are the strategies and the tactics beyond this blueprint that I'm launching to bring that to life in the organization? And what I'll challenge you to think about is that the pressure that you need to put on that lever to make that happen is going to be very dependent on where this fulcrum sits on this axis, which is in the organization you're working in. Is this a group of people that are highly adaptive, that are comfortable with change, that have already demonstrated that they're on board and really excited about this process? Or is this a group of people that is maybe more entrenched, more stuck in the normal ways of working, perhaps have some obstacles that they need to work through to adopt this change? Because the answer to that question is going to help you understand what investment you need to make beyond the initial scope of work to help advise your clients to be successful in adopting the change. Clearly, the more entrenched that organization is, the more we need to be thinking about all these questions that we've just been discussing and potentially mitigating those with some recommended solutions for our customer. So the way that we do this at XPLANE, and I think a simple way that you could do even as part of your work at a very light level on the back of a napkin talking to your clients, is something we call an activation plan. An activation plan is pretty simply a designed plan to say, given this new vision we've set, given this future state, what beyond the blueprint I'm giving you do we need to do in your organization to help people, your key stakeholders, hear it, learn it, and start living it? And so the way that we go about that is this. There's sort of three key elements that might go into an activation plan that you would build. The first one is understanding the stakeholders. A key mistake a lot of people make is assuming that one plan fits all. So we've seen a dozen launch plans where it's basically we're going to launch this on the 5th and this on the 12th and this on the 30th, assuming that content is just going to canvas the entire organization to be successful. What we know from that conversation, and actually what we know going back to Greg's slide, is that even those people in that one room, in that boardroom, each one of them has a different set of needs, different incentives, different goals. So at the organizational level, we should assume that's true as well. And we want to understand what are the key stakeholder groups in this organization that we need to get on board to adopt this change, and what are their unique needs. So we can use empathy mapping, for instance, to understand that perhaps the sales team has a very different set of needs than the call center, for example. Secondly, we want to look at the organization and understand what are the milestones in this organization. Perhaps there's some driving deadlines that are driving when this needs to be rolled out, how quickly people need to understand it and move to the learning phase, when those people in the learning phase need to move into the embedding phase, and so on. So those milestones that exist in the organization are also going to help us frame our activation plan and the recommendations we make to our customer or our sponsor. And then lastly, with that in mind, we start to think about what are the activities or the interventions that we would design for each of those phases. So for each stakeholder, how do we best communicate to them to get them to understand and accept the change? What do we need to equip them with in terms of tools, job aids, or learning to get them through that training and believe it phase? And what changes might we need to make in the system to embed it over time? And this again includes everything from onboarding programs to incentive plans. Knowing that, identifying that, and displaying that by key stakeholder group is something that will actually scale from everything from a large transformation in the organization down to the smallest shift in a process. It's simply a matter of how many interventions we design. When I say interventions, these are some examples of things that we're talking about, but I know that you all have many ideas about what this can look like. But we do think about, in an organization, what's key here is what's maybe already authentic in that organization. How do people already learn today? So if they're already used to having 1-minute videos distributed in their organization, let's take advantage of that and actually create one about our transformation so we can start to communicate that to the organization. If they're already used to having a town hall meeting, how do we ride on those rails and build messaging around what we're doing into that space? How do we maybe actually give our sponsor the talking points for their upcoming town hall meeting so that they can address that issue? Or hopefully, maybe they'll allow you to do something even more creative. Build a hackathon, build a workshop, some way to actually engage employees. We love at XPLANE building games. Whenever we can in a transformation, we'll do either a role-playing game or a rehearsal or some sort of a simulation. We talked about prototyping as a great tool for giving stakeholders the experience of that new way of work. Anything that allows people to rehearse the new ways in a risk-free environment can be really powerful. And when you're done, you end up with something that looks like this. You've got an activation roadmap for your initiative that is thoughtful, that is targeted at key stakeholders, and that has recommendations that maybe you're not going to deliver, but for your sponsor for that particular project is going to be welcome advice to help them bring it to life, because they're in it with you and wanting to see this come to life. And oftentimes they can leverage resources that already exist in the organization to help build those communications or make those recommended changes in the organization. In other cases, as service designers, this is an opportunity for us to actually cross-sell new work. It might be possible that we do come from a place where we're really well positioned to actually help them with some of these other solutions. And if we've made the business case that this is also going to help them adopt the thing they hired us for in the first place, it may be an opportunity to deepen our relationship with our customers. So I'm going to go through very quickly one last thing, which is just a very practical outline of how you might do this. And then we'd love to address some questions. I'll probably take another five or 10 minutes on this. 7 steps in terms of ways that you can actually build an activation plan for yourself and bring it to life. The first thing that we want to do is envision the desired future. This is something that we often do with our clients as a very quick exercise, even a brainstorming exercise at the beginning of an engagement. But also, this is very powerful for you as a designer to get inside the head of your organization. And so what we would do in this particular case is this is a vision map exercise template. That's an example, but the exercise is very simple. To understand very clearly what's the current state that we're solving for that customer and draw or visualize or describe that. ideally in partnership with our partner that we're doing this work with. Secondly, to identify what is that clear future state that we want to be in. What does good look like? What does it look like when we've actually launched this new approach? And then what are the key milestones or events that need to happen in the organization to get us there? This gives us just a very simple one-page picture of the transformation that we're trying to make that will then help us do the work to think about what has to happen in the organization to get there next. And this could look like anything from, physical drawing on a piece of paper or a whiteboard to dropping a template like this into a mural or a Miro and doing this exercise remotely with our clients. That sets up the second step very neatly, which is the empathy step. We want to start to identify with our key stakeholders and their unique needs. So in this particular example, these are sort of two templates or exercises that we often use. One is something we call the hoodoo canvas, which actually really helps us get under the hood of who are these stakeholders we need to work with. What we do first in this one is we brainstorm who are the key stakeholders that need to understand this information and move to action for us to adopt this. Typically, we try to get to 3, 5, 6 groups at the total. Then we ask the question, what do we need them to do? What is the action that they need to take in order to bring this to life? So if we go back to Greg's example, let's talk about Christian. What do we need Christian to do at the end of this meeting in order to help bring this to life? Once we can get that specific with a stakeholder and what we need them to do, we can then go to the next part of the exercise, which is what are the key questions we need to answer for Christian to bring this to life for him? What are the objections that he might be thinking about? What are the risks that he may have? What are the answers he's looking from us that we need to answer? But if we were going to boil it down to 3 questions, what are the 3 questions for this stakeholder that we need to address? That starts to key into the content that we need to start sharing in our communications phase. If you want to go even deeper on a stakeholder, probably many people are familiar with the empathy map canvas, but the empathy map is another great way to get literally inside the head of a persona within that stakeholder group and understand what are they feeling, what are they seeing, what are maybe the things that they're not voicing. Key idea is step 2, use empathy to really start to diagnose who are the stakeholders and what do they need to move there. Again, what that might look like, whether we're doing it with sticky notes in a live session or a mural, you can drop these templates literally into a mural or a Miro or another remote working tool and have these conversations. And we encourage you to actually take these first findings back to those stakeholders and validate them. Again, opportunity for engagement. Because if one person in that stakeholder group can share with you what that stakeholder group's feeling, you're going to get a lot farther faster. The next thing we do is we take the activation curve and actually map those stakeholder groups to where they're at today. So that might look like, hey, our global consumer experience team, is way up here. They're in the applying phase already, but the business leads and the regions don't get it at all, and you should probably invest some time there. Bottom line is understanding where we're starting from and where we need to get people to is also a core part of this, so that we can understand maybe, do we need to wait for this group, our effort on communications, or do we need to wait it on skills building? The fourth step is to understand what resources you already have in the organization. How does information already flow? We're not probably going to have a lot of budget to do this work, so it's often useful to do a quick audit to understand what already works in our partner company. What rituals do they already have? Do they have a regular Monday morning meeting with each team lead? Do they have video monitors up in every office? Do they have an intranet site that all the remote workers are looking at every day where we can scroll information? What are the rails that we can already ride on to take advantage of that so that we can actually lower the inertia to trying new things? And that can be done very simply by using a template to either audit this through interviews or something like the worksheet we just described, which can actually help you have a conversation with your sponsor about what exists in the organization. Step 5, we want you to evaluate the organizational capacity for change. Remember that change lever, figuring out where that fulcrum is. Is this group really open to change, or is this group really resistant to change? Knowing that is critical to understanding how much of a lift you need to put on it. There's a bunch of tools that you're familiar with for doing this, but basically what you're looking for are, what are the barriers or obstacles to change? What are the things, where are the places we're going to hit resistance in the organization that we should anticipate and mitigate? So you can use tools like, XPLANE has developed some tools like discovery cards and barriers to change cards, where you can use a simple card sort exercise with your sponsors or stakeholder groups to understand that. You can use structured interviews, you can use surveys, you can use focus groups, many of the tools that we're very accustomed to. Obviously, if you're embedded in the organization, you've got the benefit of observation to rely on. But the goal there is to come up with, effectively, what are the top 5 or 6 areas in this particular organization that are going to cause us resistance or obstacles to adopting this new way of work? Because then we can build that into the content in our communications and our training and our activation plan. And then getting to the end here, step 6, what are the building blocks that you're now going to build your activation plan out of? We've got a worksheet that I'm highlighting here that recommends a bunch that we've seen in organizations, but you can also, of course, we're all creative folks in this room. You can come up with your own. What I will highlight is there's some ways I would think about this, regardless of whether you decide this is a video campaign, whether this is a guerrilla marketing campaign, whether this is a game, whether this is just a PowerPoint presentation. Sometimes those are appropriate. You want to be thinking about meeting people in their various learning styles. So for example, the way we've organized this worksheet for, let's say for introverts and extroverts, as an introvert, I like to go and actually do my homework and do my research before I actually show up in a meeting and start asking questions. So for me, maybe it's really important that I can do some reading on the intranet. Maybe I can actually go to a website. Maybe I can read an FAQ. Maybe there's some e-learning about this that I can get either from within or outside of the company so that I'm wiser when I start. For extroverts, maybe interacting and exploring with others is a bucket you want to explore. And you might be thinking about doing like a workshop to bring people together. Or you might be thinking about a learning game, for example. There's other mechanisms for how you share the story in a broad sense. For a lot of people in that internalizing phase, we want to be thinking about activities that are going to help them personalize the story. So how do we get them in a conversation about what would this mean for you if in your call center we implemented this new way of work? What's that experience going to be like? Tell us the pros and cons. Something as simple as a discussion guide between a manager and their direct report could be powerful in this example. In the learning phase, things like tools for daily work, things that are actually just going to help people, whether they be a playbook, a process chart, a new guide, a script, the things that are going to actually lower the risk for them to adopt the change that you're trying to create would be something you might want to include here. One of my favorite categories is flipping learners to teachers, thinking about how do we get folks maybe that we're building into our workshops where we're doing the journey mapping and prototyping and user testing and turn them into teachers for the rest of their organization. So the folks that have participated in those events that can now go out and be ambassadors for, hey, I actually participated in this and it was great. It really helped us do something different. So thinking about interventions there can be useful. And then the last categories are things about how do you embed it? How do you keep things top of mind with reminders? How do you maintain victories? How do you celebrate success? All of these aspects can be combined in an intelligent way to help you and your sponsor bring your project to life. And then the very last thing I want to encourage us to be thinking about as we're doing this, because it actually helps build a business case for our clients to support us doing this work, is measurement. As we're executing our programs, as we're executing these interventions and maybe winning the day of convincing our sponsors that, yeah, it's important that we also wrap this communications and this learning and this activation work around this initiative, it's very useful to have a conversation right out of the gates with our sponsors around what is the measurement that we can look at that'll tell us that we're succeeding here? How do we know that this change is actually happening and that people are adopting it? And for each of these phases of the adoption curve, we can actually look at a series of questions which might help us demonstrate that this is actually occurring in their organization. Whether they be qualitative questions, simply what percentage of employees in this organization understand why we're doing it, what it is, and what it means for them. All the way to more quantitative, measurable things that might appear on the company dashboard, like increases in NPS score, or increases in sales results, or some other very measurable metric. If we can identify a very simple set of measurements that we can pair with this activation plan, it will allow us to have a business-based conversation with our sponsors that might actually support the added investment in activation this might take, and then B, the continuing refinement and ongoing investment to ensure that the adoption actually does take place, allowing us to get out of that 80% of programs that fail and into that 20% of programs that are successful, which is really the end goal for all of us.
Thank you so much, Ray. This was great. You have anything else to show? Cool.
Nope. I think time to take the questions.
Yeah, I'm going to start the very first question. I'm going to get the room with some really smart questions here. But the biggest question I have for you is that our job as designers is already difficult, complicated, thorough, extensive, and usually we have 4, 5, 6 ways to do a lot of stuff. What you just showed us over here is a lot more stuff, right? Let's just be pragmatic about this. This is stuff that we don't really do usually, and some of the stuff is kind of like a sampling of activities you can do, and it's kind of like extensive. But how much more work is this for us to do this? Let's say 10%, and how impactful is it to actually do this in order to actually fight that 80% dropout?
That's a great question. I mean, what I've outlined here could be actually a whole practice area, right? In fact, it is for us, and it's the practice area that I run. But I think to make it very practical for you, what I would think about is this. If we start small, if we maybe build in as part of our process a 1 or 2 hour workshop with our partner, our sponsor, our client, with the title, how do we ensure adoption of this program? And we invest that 1 or 2 hours with our client to be thinking about, even at a very high level, what is a very simple activation plan that we could bring to life. 2 things are going to happen. One is that we're going to differentiate ourselves from a lot of people that they've worked with who, particularly consultants have a bad rap, right? We have this reputation of throwing something over the wall and wishing it good luck, and it doesn't really come to life. We're demonstrating to our client that we really are aligned in their goal of bringing it to life, and we want to support that adoption effort. And so if we can even get an hour or 2 hours as a module in our regular process to have a conversation with our clients around adoption, and even if it's just a conversation over the whiteboard around these 7 steps, identify at a high level a framework that they can employ to be more successful. We've generated, number 1, some significant goodwill. And number 2, we're very likely to have increased the likelihood of adoption if they take any of our recommendations. So I would start small. That would be my first answer. Don't try to do the whole program at once, but put it on the radar from the beginning with your client that you are aligned in their desire to bring it to life, and then bring something to the table about how to do it.
Right. Robin, do you want to take over? Aric, do you mind not sharing your screen anymore, because we want to see your face versus the Q&A slide.
So Aric, thanks for that. That was really an awesome presentation, and we've got several questions that popped up in the chat. Some of which I think you covered along the way there, but I'll start here with one from David Angelo. And this was actually a string of comments, I think started by Sarah, talking about bridging that gap when you were in the section about bringing the different players along. And the question that David added to Sarah's comment was curious about, what do you propose to close the gap? What should they do? What should you be doing different? I think you got into some of that in your explanation there, but especially when you started talking about activation map. But specifically on David's question about what should we do different in closing the gaps from maybe traditional. And David, if you want to expand on that too, please feel free to unmute and join in. Yeah,
no, that was really the essence of it. I mean, it is. I thought presentation material was fantastic, but having led large-scale changes before, oftentimes trying to get that senior management support, it's like, well, I don't even bothered with it. So kind of closing that gap is often a challenge.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great question. What I would recommend here, I think, is in addition to that, and the last question, my recommendation that you actually call out an activation or adoption chunk of work is also that you just embed within the work in your daily flow some of this empathy work. So as you're doing the journey mapping, as you're doing the workshops with stakeholders, as you're meeting with people, doing interviews, include some of those key questions that are going to help you uncover where are the barriers to change, what are the obstacles that exist in this organization, what are X, Y, or Z stakeholders really fearing or thinking about, and then weaving that into all of your conversations with your sponsors. Hey, while we were doing this journey mapping, we recognized that one of the things the sales team is going to have a conflict with is that we're asking them to do this, but they're incented to do that. How are we going to address that? And so, like a doctor, you can start to surface symptoms along the journey with your sponsor that are demonstrating that you're being really proactive about that. But you're also coming with some evidence, not just assumptions, but evidence-based assumptions that you're kind of putting them in a position to react to. And that's going to help win the day in terms of getting their buy-in to support the things you're recommending.
Well, that makes sense, because I really like what you added in step 7 with the measurement. So if you can get some of the measurement, you can get some quantification. You don't have to polish the gemstone, but something to have a discussion with, taking it up to executive management to get a burning platform to go make it happen. But sorry, I don't want to take us off on a tangent. Thank you.
No, that's great. Thank you, David.
Actually, I think in the conversation we addressed to a question from our own Red here in Dallas, talking about measuring, walking the talk. I think was the words he used, but specifically the measurement section. I was looking forward to in your presentation, because that really. I think that's what maybe as a consultant you could expand on. Is that what gets you the gig the next time around? Do you show these measurements and what you were able to do with it, or does it create a continued engagement with the company or that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I can't tell you how valuable it is if you can get it, and it's sort of obvious, right? And particularly in a business environment. Demonstrable results and measurement go a long way with a skeptical audience. There's generally a skepticism oftentimes around consultants somewhere in their organization that will be working anyway. There's oftentimes even more skepticism around something that is maybe more esoteric, like service design, than traditional strategy consulting, for example, in some audiences. And so anything that we can do, I think, to prove that this isn't soft stuff, this is real stuff, this is stuff that actually is going to make a demonstrable impact in the business, and let me show you how, is going to help our case, either with the current client or next time you're pitching work to another client, that you can say, hey, and I can show you the impact of this. I think in service design, we have the gift, a lot of our work, for instance, is going to make measurable customer impact. For example, we know that 2/3 of the Fortune 1000 uses NPS as a standard measurement tool. So let's take advantage of that and say, okay, how in this particular process can we measure the customer experience, and at the very beginning of the project, make sure you get the benchmark so that as you're implementing your recommendations, you can see that shift, and then use that shift to help build credibility for the next thing that we do together, either in that client or with someone else that we're presenting our information to.
That's excellent. I think Brandon, do we have?
Yeah, I know it's 1:00, but we've got a couple more questions. If everybody can stick around for a little bit. If you have to drop, that's fine. There's a recording. You can find it later. So we did have one question, actually, probably a lot of people are wondering, from Alicia Moore. Is it possible to get some of these worksheets that you were showing us?
Yes, absolutely. So we have on our website, if you go to Studio X, everything I showed you today is available for free download. So we've got a lot of our worksheets, a lot of our method cards, et cetera, available for download. I'm also happy to send Greg and crew here this presentation. So if you want to share that out, you can feel free to do that. So either go to www.xplane.com, go to Studio X. You'll find worksheets. You can download those for free, or we'll share it out through this presentation. We encourage folks to use them freely.
Fantastic. Thanks, Aric. And a fast follow to that is, this is from Jean Mutton. How much of what you do is training, and how much would you consider facilitation? She says, or he or she says, sorry. Is it all about teaching a man to fish?
That is a great question, and it's been an existential question for XPLANE for a long time. In fact, the answer to that is that we found 3 years ago when we did our visioning for our own company, which we do every 3 years. We do a 3-year sort of visioning cycle. We confronted that exact question, which is by and large, we've been a service organization that has been doing work, but we're finding our clients telling us that, hey, what you're teaching us is actually super valuable. And so part of why we actually created Studio X was to start to become teachers as part of our role as well, and try to build this capability on a broader scale, both with our clients, but also with change makers generally in the world. So I'd say nowadays we're probably in about a 70-30 mode, but but I think you'll all experience this in your own work too, working with your clients, that as you are doing the work and as you are helping build new capabilities in that organization, that's a virtuous cycle. We're learning every day from the work that we're doing. We're learning from our clients and our exchange. Then that's feeding new best practices and new opportunities and new ways of work into our knowledge base. And then by sharing it out, it only sort of accelerates that cycle. So we love doing events like this for this exact reason. I'm going to end up learning a ton from everyone on this call as well over time. So I think personally, it's a best practice for us as designers to be both fishing for our clients, but also in the process teaching them to fish, because ultimately it's going to accelerate positive change much more quickly.
Awesome. Thank you. I've got two more here. Another from David. He asked if there was any mapping of the tools to the change transitions curve.
That's a really interesting question. We've done it for ourselves internally. I don't think we've published it in terms of how that necessarily works. Mm-hmm. And I think there's an interesting opportunity to lay that out in a sort of more methodical approach that could be followed. So I'm going to take that one as a suggestion and work on that as inspiration. Perfect example of my last statement. Thank you for that.
Yeah, that's really cool. Thanks for the prompt, David. And I've got one more here that's kind of near and dear to me. Peter asks, where do you use role play in the process? Maybe for empathy creation, improv, prototyping, I'm a tree, that kind of stuff. Where do you see that in this flow that you've outlined?
We use it throughout, actually. We use it heavily in the discovery process, for example. Even in I think probably most people are familiar with empathy mapping as a toolkit. We'll use role play even there to say, if we're not talking to the direct stakeholders, we'll have people in the room play those stakeholders, which oftentimes gives us much more raw content because everyone loves to try to get inside their boss's head, for example. So we'll use role play in the discovery process to try to imagine certain scenarios. We'll use it in stakeholder interviews to try to get them to maybe role play and personify their stakeholder group's feelings, because it's a lot easier. It's easier for somebody to say, well, my peers think this, then I think this. So that's a great example of it. And then in prototyping is another area where we heavily invest in role playing, because we're asking people basically to rehearse a new way of work and then diagnose with us, what worked great about that, what could have made it better. That role playing allows people to some space to dream, some space to try something in a new way of work, and some space to give us feedback in a risk-free environment.
Well, Aric, thank you so much for your help. This has been really new. I think it's a very new dimension to service design that we just opened up today, because we hear a lot of complaining, so to speak, about how do we move through, how do we just stop doing a discovery and we just get a fourth diamond, so to speak, right? So this is a lot more work, obviously, as we discussed, but if it's worth it, we're definitely need to discuss this further. Thank you so much for making this available to all of us. This is going to be great to share. This is a lot of content that we're going to digest and see what works for whom, right? Because some of the stuff you describe over here are not going to be as easy for some people and others. Like role playing, for example, we've tried this before and it doesn't always work, right? So this has been great. It's fantastic. So thank you so much for sharing this with us. Thank you so much for all the hard work you've been doing at XPLANE for the last 15 years. And we're looking forward to have you again maybe sometime next year, right? So see if we can actually just, see with our audience who's tried it, who's failed, who's succeeded, and what we learned through the process. I think, do we have any more questions, Brandon, Robin? Are we good to go?
I think that's it.
Yeah, I think we covered it.
All right.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much. It's been my true pleasure to be here today. And please feel free, anyone, if you've got follow-up questions, to reach out to me directly. I'm always happy to chat with other professionals in the field, and I wish you all well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aric.
Yeah.
And I guess we will make the presentation available on the Meetup site. That's the best place to load a PDF or whatever you have, and then people can just go also to your site and download the forms and the canvases and templates.
Very good.
Thank you so much, everybody. We don't really have anything in the books yet for October, November, December. We're working on a couple of events. So we will let you know through the LinkedIn and Meetup messaging what the next speaker is going to be. But it'd be great. There's no doubt about it. We've had some great speakers this year, and Aric is obviously making us live once again. So fantastic work, everybody. Thank you so much for everybody joining us from all over the world, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Bye, all.
Bye, all. Thank you.
Thanks so much.